Welcome to another episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sebastian. We owe an explanation to our listeners. This is the first episode that we are recording not sitting in the same room. We are actually across the ocean. Sebastian is currently in the United States. Can you give us the reason? What was the thing that you are doing over there?
Yes, I started teaching Polish film here in Ohio at Cleveland State University. It's just a one semester trip. I'm a kind of a visiting professor here, although I'm not a professor per se. But it gives me a great joy, to introduce American students to Polish cinema, which is really awesome. And also, if you are looking at our Facebook page, you can see I'm putting there some American trivia about Hitchcock that I observe here while staying at Ohio in Cleveland. And also, for example, I know that next in the upcoming weeks there will be huge Hitchcock retrospective in New York, so I will also post something about it. So it's kind of Michał is the Polish branch of our project now until June, and I'm here in US.
Wonderful. This makes our project even more international, so I'm very happy about that. And also, yes, please do follow our Facebook page, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock. Recently, we posted a nice interview in which the recent Oscar winner Bong Joon-ho actually mentions Alfred Hitchcock as the most original of all film authors. So that made us very, very happy. I doubt that Bong would have made the same claim about the movie that we are discussing today. I think the film is I'll be honest, it's a tough one. It's a tough one to even sit through. The film is called Juno and the Paycock. Or Juno and the Peacock. It was made in 1929 and it's an early sound film by Hitchcock. Last time we discussed Blackmail and the brilliant way in which Hitchcock experimented with sound. I think in this film we can start by saying that the experimentation is much less brilliant, much less daring. What would you say about this screening of Juno and the Peacock?
Oh yes, I agree. For me, this movie was a great introduction to the playwright Sean O'Casey, whom I'm sure we'll tell more about him. But certainly, this movie is a surprise for anyone who saw Blackmail, right? Because we like to take this evolutionary approach and see that directors are developing. So if Hitchcock made this brilliant Blackmail, so we assume that his next sound movie would be at least equally thrilling and equally good, but it was not like that in this case.
No, not at all. It's actually, it was quite tough for me to watch the film. I think that, I'm not an English native speaker, so there is a problem also for me to follow the Irish dialogue. I think it's not that easy for American native speaker as well to follow this dialogue. I wish I had access to this film with subtitles. Unfortunately, I didn't. So I feel like also large parts of the plot were difficult for me. I had to fill out the blanks by reading the book by Charles Barr, of course, who is the guide for English Hitchcock in his book English Hitchcock, and also some information that was to be found in the Patrick McGilligan book. But yeah, it's. I think everyone agrees that this is not a brilliant film in technical aspects, and it's also famous for very, very long takes of people talking in a very stage-like manner. But you mentioned Sean O'Casey, so maybe you can tell a little bit about him and about the play, about the context of Juno and the Peacock.
So Sean O'Casey is still one of the most important playwrights that were born in Ireland and were kind of this national playwrights tackling national topics. That was a very rough period when he was creating and living in Ireland. He was born in the northern part of Dublin in so-called slums. He had a very difficult childhood. Poverty was everywhere, and he was very close also to the workers' cause, which was one of the reasons of his split with this intellectuals who were supporting the independence of Ireland. So he was this, let's say, people's artist in a way, and he wrote several other plays before The Shadow of a Gunman, which was his breakthrough play, staged at Abbey Theatre, the most important theatre in Ireland at the time. And Juno and the Paycock is the second part of his trilogy about, Irish experience, Irish War of Independence, Irish Civil War. So that's certainly, let's say, like I see some similarities between his plays and some, Polish artists who were writing similarly engaged plays, similarly attentive to, national symbols, national cause, national problems. So in a way, I find some, affinities between Irish experience and Polish experience, also when it comes to the, fighting for independence. But of course, that was certainly a different tradition. But what is striking for me is that, the title of Charles Barr's book is English Hitchcock, and one of his, main arguments is that Hitchcock's output was quintessentially English, so that's why his book is titled English Hitchcock, not British Hitchcock, as the other book about Hitchcock is titled. So it may be a small difference, but I think this movie shows us that maybe it was not necessarily 100% English, because here we have English director creating in London, taking this famous Irish play and making a so-called prestigious early sound movie based on that. And of course, it was the era when adaptations of famous plays were really faithfully represented. They couldn't make many changes. Hitchcock couldn't really rewrite the play as he did with several others later in his career. So that was a very faithful adaptation. And Charles Barr says that Hitchcock had some interest in the material and he liked the play, and it was some themes in it were close to his sensibility. But on the other hand, many other authors say the opposite, right? They say that Hitchcock had no interest in doing that, and that was, just part of his in-between jobs. Also, just maybe a bit of context, what was happening at the time in the British film industry. There were serious, significant layoffs at British International Pictures, because John Maxwell, who was the producer, he invested very much he invested a lot in sound pictures at the time. Blackmail was also pretty expensive production, and this investment couldn't be returned. I mean, the profits were not there on the horizon, and one of the reasons that McGilligan gives for that is that, American audience, as you mentioned, that's very interesting. You mentioned that you couldn't grasp many elements of the dialogue. I would have the same problem even more, as your English is much better than mine. But luckily, I'm watching that at Amazon Prime with English subtitles, which kind of allowed me to understand what was going on. And McGilligan says that American audience didn't like British and other accents, that they couldn't really tune into these movies. So that's why British movies were not successful overseas at the time, and Blackmail was not successful as well in US at the time. So that's one of the reasons that they started to make these movies at BIP that were oriented for English audience, for British audience. And that's how, Juno and the Paycock project came up.
Great, that's fantastic context. Also, I wish I could watch it with the subtitles. The problem thing, I think, is that, it's interesting, of course, Hitchcock, as a Catholic in the UK, needed to have some distance to the English identity, because Catholics were persecuted for many centuries in England, and he took pride actually in his faith, and in his identity. So I think he could sympathize with Catholic Irish. So that's probably one connection. Also, this portrayal of this close community of the family, and there are also some melodramatic elements from earlier films here that are recurring, like, for example, the unwanted pregnancy, and the whole idea of this sort of like political activity that also happened in the Manxmen. We saw the main character there, sort of doing the rally for the workers. But overall, I just think that Charles Barr actually points out that there is a shot in this film that is 4.5 minutes long, and it's just actors standing in front of a camera. And that this particular shot is longer than all the previous shots in the film that are much shorter. I think that one thing that is clearly missing from this film is this idea of montage and of preparing subjective shots and subjective sequences that would really replicate the way in which people gather information visually. And I think this is one of Hitchcock's forte, to make us see as the characters see. If it is Scotty in his car in Vertigo, or L.B. Jeffries in Rear Window, here there are simply no touches like that. Of course, because of the theatrical nature, I was thinking alongside of Rope, for example. In Rope also we'll have those very long takes and people will be talking, but there the camera will be much more fluid. So I have to honestly say I don't have much in this film that I can cling to. I was pretty indifferent to it. I read a little bit about the context. That was interesting, at that time to have this film and display in the UK. But overall, I would say that it's not a film that I found interesting or a film that I would like to revisit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And maybe it's significant that Hitchcock's silent movies are now more in the foreground than his early sound movies, besides the blackmail. Like, for example, Juno and the Paycock, as far as I know, was not restored in contrast to his silent movies, which were restored. Yeah, I also, I find it very disappointing film, maybe not as much as Erich Romer and Claude Chabrol, who just wrote this, very strong sentence that simply it's not a Hitchcock movie. It's just not a Hitchcock movie, So that was part of this, trying to figure out how to put this movie, into Hitchcock ever, and how to kind of explain also why did he do it at all. So, but I must say I like this the idea which comes from the play, not from Hitchcock, but the idea of this sudden inheritance which strikes a bell. And I'm thinking about Tess. In Tess we had this maybe not inheritance, not money, but this idea that suddenly this peasant man is a nobleman. He has some roots. Or Christmas in July by Preston Sturges, when there is this short period when we think that we have money, like the poor people think they can own lots of goods, they can buy commodities, they can live on credit, and then suddenly, the realization comes that it's not true. Of course, it's not the most important theme of the movie, but I liked it. I think part of it works, really. And I wanted to ask you if you sense some kind of Shakespearean elements in the play, meaning this couple of, let's say, bums, like the captain and Joxer, who are this, I would say they are kind of like this, Shakespearean droll couple. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a nice notion. We will see in a film that we will mention a little bit later in the podcast that actually Hitchcock directed some Shakespearean moments on film. But yes, insofar that, the English drama is by definition in depth to Shakespeare, and many tropes are Shakespearean, like this mixture of the low life and the high life, like the eternal theme of class reversal that you mentioned, the sudden inheritance, the sudden piece of news that changes the whole class structure before our very eyes. The nobleman becomes the poor man becomes the nobleman. That's one of the tropes of also Shakespearean drama, and also of Dickens. And I think that Dickensian notes are also to be discerned here, because Dickens was the biggest master of those sudden reversals, and especially Oliver Twist is the exemplary in this respect. I also would say that, Hitchcock definitely had some interest in portraying political activities. We saw this in Manxman, we will see this in Topaz or Notorious. There are those political elements in his films, and here you can also tell that that this rally and this whole question of independence is treated in all seriousness, I think, by him. I think he could sympathize with the struggle. It's just that, at the same time, there is a much better Irish filmmaker in the person of John Ford, and the films that he's making are so much more poetic and also visually striking, especially I'm thinking of The Informer, which will be made in 1935. So here I would say that this is not really a Hitchcock movie for me either. It's more like a failed John Ford movie. I think that John Ford should have made this material into a film, and it's too bad he didn't do it. So yeah, that's my general impression.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought, because John Ford, after making The Informer, which of course has the similar theme of treason in it as Juno and the Paycock, he made actually the adaptation of the third part of Sean Casey's trilogy, the Plow and the Stars, which is one of his less known movies. I haven't seen it yet.
I saw it,
but so you see, so like we have this. So the first part I think was not adapted for the screen, the Shadow of a Gunman. But let's say Hitchcock made the second part, and John Ford, let's say more predestined to do it because of his Irish background. Did the third one, I think 1936.
Oh, that's nice.
So certainly,
I completely forgot about The Plow and the Stars. I did see it, and I do remember now that I think of it, those films are kind of similar. But it was years ago that I saw that film. But overall, I would say that yes, this is also we will have the situation next time when we'll discuss The Skin Game, or is there another one along the way, or Murder? We'll discuss Murder, but we'll also come across The Skin Game at some point. And these films are usually compared to one another. That there are those talky, stagey adaptations, and here as I said, I find quite little beauty to cling to. I am glad that he preserved those performances, because apparently many of those actors, and some of them actually appeared in Blackmail and in other Hitchcock films, but many of them were prime stage actors of their time. So I think there is this documentary also almost like quality to the film. But overall, I would say that there's not much more that I can sort of squeeze out of this film. I feel.
I see. Certainly, Sarah Allgood's performance of Mrs. Boyle, so the titular Juno, is let's say the historic performance. I'm a bit surprised that you're that harsh towards the movie, because what I find interesting is the question because there are, I think, some competing accounts regarding this movie. So what do you think? Did Hitchcock just didn't care what will be the result, that he didn't really pay attention, or maybe he was forced to do it in this very format of this photographed play, which he, as we all know, he hated this format. So what was what do you think was the reason that this movie looks so simple, and it doesn't has this Hitchcockian touch or feel at all?
I cannot really tell. I think that probably he wasn't that much invested. Also, I think one of the biographers mentions that at this point he was a little bit frustrated with British International Pictures, with this whole mode of production. So maybe there was this idea floating around, or maybe, and this is also important, I think that he probably enjoyed working with those actors. I mean, he was an avid theater goer, so for him working with those names and these people must have brought some fun. But I just think that in terms of cinematic excitement, probably it didn't generate much in him. And also, I think, Blackmail is a tough act to follow. It wasn't it was by no means fixed that Hitchcock at this stage of his career was supposed to become what he would later become. I think he was in a state of flux. He didn't necessarily know what the Hitchcock brand will be. So he was trying different things along this also this mode of filming a play that was quite popular at the time. And it's only with historical hindsight that we'd see the whole filmography as one piece. He was in the moment. He just made a movie that was extremely revolutionary and innovative in Blackmail, and now he was just doing something quite conventional, which he also did in his silent years. I mean, let's think about Champagne and Farmer's Wife. So it's not like it's the first time that that he goes conventional. I mean, he just goes conventional within the talking picture.
Yeah, that's right. But also, I think it's interesting that, this play, so the Juno and the Paycock, is still staged, and it's still a piece of theater that is, adapted again for stage. I know that last year in Ireland there was I think, pretty prestigious staging of that, and so the material seems to be, still more or less fresh. I mean, it's still inspiring for some directors and actors. And here we have actually the only version of this play. So I also find it interesting that it was not adapted again. So not that Hitchcock made the definitive version of it, of course, but that at this time, they were just transferring this plays to screen almost immediately. I mean, within like several years or sometimes one season of a successful play made it possible to make an adaptation. But here we have the only version. And yeah, but basically I agree with you that it's pretty forgettable. Although probably we should note for our listeners who, want to trace the evolution of Hitchcock style, that there are some sound effects and some kind of imposition of sound onto the image that are pretty interesting. Mostly the scene of a wake, that there is this neighbor who's mourning his son, and we know that one of the characters is the killer, probably, of that son. I think it's pretty powerful. So like Hitchcock was not moving his camera a lot. There are just few dollies, just very minor camera work, but still the sound of crying or gunshots is pretty powerful. So I think that was his way to do, like, at least some kind of experimenting in this difficult era for filmmakers focused on the image.
So yeah, and well, as I said, I would probably finish at that. I'm not that surprised the play wasn't filmed again. I think it's probably very resonant in Irish context, but there are also Polish plays that I don't think would play that well internationally. So let's discuss the other film that we only will mention in passing here, because actually it's not a fully directed film by Hitchcock. It's a film called Elstree Calling. It's not, by no means, it's not a Hitchcock film, but it's a film in which Hitchcock had a hand, let's say. So let's discuss briefly this musical by Hitchcock, or musical with Hitchcock elements.
So the title, as you mentioned, is Elstree Calling, and it's if Blackmail was the first, British talkie, then Elstree Calling is considered the first British musical. Although it's rather, a composition of sketches, a vaudeville, which shows some of the, most cherished performance of the era that were working at British International Pictures. And also, we have also the very significant presence of Anna May Wong, so the real star of the period. I found it very interesting that she appears there. Later, 2 years later, she will appear in Shanghai Express along Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah, and the film is basically a review. It's like King of Jazz in the States, or Broadway Melody of XXXXX. It's just a string of numbers. Interestingly enough, some sequences are shot in pate color, and they are preserved in color. So it's just a review of talents, and apparently it's not very good, by the way. It's not very imaginative. It's just mediocre, I have to say. I mean, there is no topping Americans in entertainment at that time. But so if someone wants to really see something really spectacular, I would say, see something like King of Jazz, for example. But here, it's fun to see those performances. I always, like to see the entertainment of the old days. But Hitchcock apparently only directed some of the filling, the connecting material, especially with the Shakespearean actor doing sort of a Shakespeare spoof, and also this scene of a family adjusting a very, very primitive TV set, which looks a little bit like a frame for a picture. So this is his role in this project, but it's not really his project. It's fun, though, because I do remember I read many years ago, when I was reading the book, I think by Tom Ryle, called Alfred Hitchcock and the British Film Industry or something like that. I remember that this movie was completely unavailable. I even reached out to the grandson or son of Michael Balcon, whom I found online, and he wrote me back saying that, hello, Michael, it's very nice that you are interested in Hitchcock and blah, blah. And I asked him, do you have access to this film, Elstree Calling? And he said, no, it's completely unavailable. So I find it touching that now actually, this movie can be watched. So that was a nice diversion, and it also shows you that, Hitchcock was doing this kind of simply, paid job, to direct those connecting tissue of the film.
Yeah, it's now available in nice quality on DVD, so everyone can buy it. And certainly, it's one of these gaps in Hitchcock filmography that it's always nice to fill. Although, yeah, I agree with you that it's not particularly interesting. The whole concept for me seems a bit forced, even by early 1930s standards. But still, I liked the idea that it's a bit like, of course, it will sound funny, but it's a bit like Singing in the Rain, meaning that it shows us the backstage, the view from the back of how they did entertainment at the time. So it's also a document of the times, this bizarre fusion of theater and TV to a certain extent, right? I mean, this early TV efforts to capture the image and maybe bits of ballet and chorus girls. So like everything's there. Not many jokes are really funny anymore. They just do not work. But still, it's like a capsule in time. I must say I enjoyed this aspect of it, like this really obscure film from Great Britain that somehow, Hitchcock was there to direct parts of it. And yeah, he directs part of it, and also McGilligan states that he reshoot parts of it. So the producer was not, John Maxwell, I think, was not satisfied. He considered it a bore. So Hitchcock was asked to reshoot parts of it, so like to correct it in a way. So, and also we have, for example, jokes about the jazz singer with maybe not very politically correct blackface, I think, in Elstree Calling. So it's, as I mentioned, it's a historical document almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And also these two films, Juno and the Paycock and Elstree Calling, really make you remember that Hitchcock was very closely connected to theater, that, he was a theater goer and he basically grew up in a world, almost like without cinema, I mean, but mostly with theater. And here he's directing theater. In Juno and the Paycock, he's also directing theater in a way. So, and theater will stay with him. I mean, in films like Stage Fright, for example, and in two parts of Men Who Knew Too Much, there are those theatrical elements. So I think it's just, I find it touching that, even this really disposable, old, not very grand film now has a nice DVD presentation, and we can watch it and we can actually fill in this blank of Hitchcock history.
Yes, that's correct, and it makes a good start for us to venture deeper into 1930s. Still, it's maybe not the most pleasant thing for us to discuss the lesser films by the master, but hopefully it's still interesting for you, and we're approaching slowly, step by step, these like real masterpieces of the period, because we can say that 1930s, in Hitchcock's case, are full of masterpieces, right? Maybe not in the first part of the decade, but certainly in the second.
Yes, but even the first part of the decade has some really interesting and very weird films that I actually look forward to discussing, like Number 17 and Rich and Strange, which are crazy. So we are slowly preparing for that. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for following us on Facebook. Please, if you don't follow us on Facebook, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock, you can also write us at hitchcock.podcast@gmail.com. And please spread the word. If you like the podcast, just post it on Twitter, in your social media. We are looking to connect with Hitchcock fans everywhere. So thank you so much, Sebastian, and talk to you next time on Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.